The United States has collected taxes from Puerto Rico for 127 years. Its citizens serve in the American military. They carry American passports. And when a hurricane destroyed the entire island in 2017, the federal government sent $6 million in emergency aid. 9 days later, it sent $141 million to Texas for a storm of comparable size. Same country, same citizens, different rules. This is not an accident. It is a system. And this is exactly how it was built. Start with the geography. Because the geography explains everything that came after it. Puerto Rico sits roughly 1,000 miles southeast of Miami, same distance as New York to Miami. It is the easternmost anchor of the Greater Antilles, the chain of large islands that includes Cuba, Jamaica, and Hispaniola. And its position is not incidental. It is strategic in a way that has made it a target for every empire that ever operated in the Atlantic world. To the west lies the Mona Passage, a 90-mile-wide strait separating Puerto Rico from the Dominican Republic. This is one of the most important shipping lanes on Earth. It connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Panama Canal. Whoever controls Puerto Rico controls the flow of goods and wealth into and out of the entire Western Hemisphere. That is not geography trivia. That is the reason the Spanish held it for 400 years. That is the reason the United States wanted it in 1898. And that is the reason Washington has never seriously entertained letting it go. But location is only the first layer. The terrain is the second. Puerto Rico is not a flat tropical island. It is a mountain fortress. The Cordillera Central runs east to west across the entire island, rising to over 4,300 feet at its highest peak. This spine divides the island into two completely different worlds. The north is humid and green. Trade winds hit the mountains and dump rain constantly. The south sits in the rain shadow of that same mountain range. Dry, semi-arid in places, almost desert-like. Two climates on one island separated by a single ridge. This geography forced the population to cluster on the narrow coastal plains, particularly in the north around San Juan. Which means that when a hurricane arrives, and in the Caribbean hurricanes always arrive, there is almost nowhere to go. The mountains trap the water, flash floods pour down into the densely populated coastal cities. The geography that made Puerto Rico strategically valuable also made it extraordinarily vulnerable, and the United States, when it took the island, inherited both of those facts simultaneously. There is one more geographic layer that almost nobody discusses. Just off the northern coast, running parallel to the island, is the Puerto Rico Trench, the deepest point in the entire Atlantic Ocean. At its lowest point, the Milwaukee Deep, the ocean floor drops over 27,000 feet. Drop Mount Everest into it, and the peak would still be more than a mile underwater. This trench exists because Puerto Rico sits directly on the boundary between the Caribbean tectonic plate and the North American plate. They are grinding against each other, slowly, constantly, creating a subduction zone that makes the island one of the most seismically active territories under American jurisdiction. Beautiful location, strategic position, a mountain range that divides it, a hurricane corridor that batters it, and a tectonic boundary beneath it that shakes it. This is the land the United States acquired in 1898, and this is the land it has never fully committed to. Now, go back further. Before the United States, before Spain, before Columbus, the people who lived on this island called it Borican, land of the brave. They were the Taino, not a small tribe, a complex, thriving civilization that dominated the Caribbean. Large villages, sophisticated agriculture, a culture that prized art, ceremony, and sport. They played a ceremonial ball game in stone-lined courts called Beatty, ruins of which still exist today. By the time Christopher Columbus arrived in 1493 on his second voyage, the Taino had been building this civilization for centuries. They made a decision that would cost them everything. They welcomed the strangers. The Spanish arrived looking for gold. They found it in the rivers. They renamed the island San Juan Bautista. The main trading port they called Puerto Rico, the rich port. Through a clerical mix-up that nobody bothered to correct, the names eventually swapped. The island became Puerto Rico. The capital became San Juan. What followed was a genocide conducted through forced labor, warfare, and most efficiently, disease. Smallpox and measles moved through the Taíno population with a speed that no army could match. By 1520, the Spanish census declared the Taíno extinct. That was a lie. Recent DNA analysis has proven that the Taíno did not disappear. They retreated into the mountainous interior. They intermarried with poor Spanish farmers and enslaved Africans brought to work the sugar plantations. Today, the average Puerto Rican carries significant mitochondrial DNA from those original Taíno women. The people were not erased, they were absorbed, and they are still there. For the next 400 years, Puerto Rico was a neglected military outpost for the Spanish Empire. While other Spanish colonies in Latin America fought wars of independence in the early 19th century, Puerto Rico remained, partly because the geography made it easy to hold, partly because the Mona Passage made it too valuable to release. Spain kept two wings in the Caribbean, Cuba and Puerto Rico, and it held both until it no longer could. The United States had spent the 19th century conquering its own continent from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Now it wanted something beyond its borders. An empire, a naval presence, strategic position in the Caribbean and the Pacific. The sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor gave Washington the justification it needed. The Spanish-American War lasted 4 months. Spain lost everything. And in the Treaty of Paris signed at the end of 1898, Spain ceded Puerto Rico to the United States, not as a future state, not as a territory on a path to self-determination, as a spoil of war, transferred like property. Puerto Ricans were not at the negotiating table. They were not consulted. They were handed over. And the people who welcomed the American soldiers in 1898 believing they were being liberated were about to discover what American liberation actually meant. Washington had a problem. The U.S. Constitution had no clear framework for holding colonies indefinitely. The United States was supposed to be a republic, a nation built on the rejection of colonial rule. And here it was, in possession of an island full of people it did not intend to make equal. The Supreme Court solved the problem with a series of decisions known as the Insular Cases. The ruling was explicit. Puerto Rico belonged to, but was not part of the United States. The court described it as an unincorporated territory inhabited by, and these are the actual words used in 1901, alien races who were unable to understand Anglo-Saxon principles of law. The Constitution did not fully apply. Congress could do whatever it wanted, and Congress proceeded to demonstrate exactly what that meant. First, they tried cultural erasure. They changed the name to Puerto Rico, a misspelling that lasted until 1932. They made English the mandatory language in all Puerto Rican schools. Teachers who spoke Spanish in classrooms were fired. The United States tried to strip the cultural identity from the island's population through the education system. It did not work. The cultural resistance was too deep, too old, too rooted in everything that had survived 400 years of Spanish rule. But the failure of cultural erasure did not produce respect. It produced a different strategy. If you cannot make them American, make them useful. Turn the island into a profit center, extract the maximum value, return the minimum investment, and build a legal structure that makes resistance almost impossible. The first bar of that structure appeared in 1920, the Jones Act, officially the Merchant Marine Act. On paper, a patriotic measure to support the American shipping industry after World War I. In practice, applied to Puerto Rico, an economic chokehold that has never been loosened in over a century. The Jones Act requires that all goods transported by water between two American ports be carried on ships that are American flagged, American built, American owned, and American crewed. For a continental state, this is a manageable cost. For an island that imports 85% of its food and goods, it is a tax on existence. A cargo ship from China, loaded with electronics heading to the American East Coast, passes directly by Puerto Rico. It cannot stop and offload in San Juan. Those goods must travel to Jacksonville, Florida, be transferred to a specialized American vessel, and shipped back to San Juan. Every product, every time. The cost of that detour is passed directly to Puerto Rican consumers. Puerto Ricans pay significantly more for groceries, cars, fuel, and building materials than Americans on the mainland. Despite earning a fraction of the mainland average income, the Jones Act is not forgotten legislation. It has been challenged repeatedly, defended repeatedly, by the American shipping industry that profits from it every single year. Follow the money. Always follow the money. But the Jones Act was only the foundation. The walls were built in 1976 and then deliberately demolished in 1996. This is the turn that destroyed Puerto Rico's economy, and almost nobody outside the island knows it happened. Congress passed Section 936 of the Internal Revenue Code. This provision allowed American manufacturing companies to operate in Puerto Rico without paying federal corporate taxes on profits earned there. The stated purpose was economic development, and it worked. Pharmaceutical giants arrived, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Abbott, tech companies followed. Manufacturing operations scaled, high-paying jobs appeared, the middle class grew, tax revenues grew. For the first time in decades, Puerto Rico had a functioning economic base that was not dependent on federal transfers. GDP expanded, the island was producing, it had a future that was visible and measurable. Section 936 was not charity. It was an engine, and for 30 years, it ran. Then Congress turned it off. In 1996, a budget reconciliation bill included the repeal of Section 936, with a 10-year phase-out ending in 2006. The official justification was corporate welfare, that American companies were using Puerto Rico as a tax shelter. There was partial truth in that. But the solution chosen was not reform. It was elimination, with no replacement, with no transition plan, with no alternative economic engine identified or funded or even proposed. This was not an oversight. Economists inside and outside the Puerto Rican government projected the consequences before the repeal passed. They published the projections, they testified before Congress. The warnings were specific. The repeal passed anyway. When the tax break expired in 2006, the factories did not wind down gradually. They fled. Pharmaceutical companies and manufacturers left within months, not years, months. Thousands of high-paying jobs vanished. The tax base collapsed. Puerto Rico entered a recession in 2006 that it has never left. Not partially recovered from, not grown through slowly, never left. Every economic problem that followed, the debt crisis, the austerity, the population exodus, the Hurricane Maria catastrophe, every single one of them traces a direct line back to one vote in the United States Congress in 1996. The engine was removed, nothing was put in its place, and the island has been running on fumes ever since. Now you have an island with an artificially inflated cost of living from the Jones Act and a collapsed revenue base from the Section 936 repeal. The government still has to function. Schools, hospitals, infrastructure, public employees. How do you pay for it? You borrow. The Puerto Rican government began issuing bonds, and Wall Street had an extraordinary reason to buy them. Puerto Rican municipal bonds were triple tax exempt. Local taxes, state taxes, federal taxes, none of them applied. For wealthy American investors looking for tax-sheltered returns, Puerto Rican bonds were the most attractive municipal debt instrument available anywhere in the country. Wall Street bought them, enthusiastically. Banks marketed them aggressively, and the Puerto Rican government, with no other options and willing buyers on every corner of the financial industry, kept issuing them. The debt grew. 10 billion, 20 billion, 50 billion. By 2015, the total public debt exceeded $70 billion, more than 100% of the island's annual economic output. Unpayable from the moment the trajectory became clear. In any American state, this situation has a legal resolution. Chapter 9, Bankruptcy. A government declares it cannot meet its obligations and enters a court-supervised restructuring process. Creditors accept reduced payments. The government gets breathing room. Detroit used this mechanism in 2013 with $18 billion in debt. It was painful. It worked. Puerto Rico tried to access the same mechanism and discovered it could not. In 1984, buried inside a federal bill, A single amendment had been inserted that specifically excluded Puerto Rico from Chapter 9 bankruptcy protection. Not other territories, not American states. Puerto Rico, specifically by name. Nobody took public credit for inserting it. The effect was permanent and precise. Puerto Rico was legally prohibited from restructuring its debt through any standard bankruptcy mechanism. Trapped with $70 billion in obligations it could not pay, and no legal pathway to reduce them. Congress intervened in 2016, not with relief, with control. PROMESA, the Puerto Rico Oversight Management and Economic Stability Act, 7 unelected board members appointed by the president. With final authority over the Puerto Rican government's budget, their mandate was clear: pay the creditors. Everything else was secondary. They slashed public pensions, closed hundreds of schools, gutted the University of Puerto Rico, cut public services across the board. Puerto Rico has a governor elected by its people. The governor answers to the board answers to the creditors are on Wall Street. The people of Puerto Rico vote. Their votes do not determine their budget. That is what American democracy looks like in Puerto Rico. And then the storm came. September 2017, Hurricane Maria, Category 4, direct hit. The entire island lost power, every electrical customer. The power grid, already degraded by years of austerity-driven deferred maintenance, was destroyed. What followed was the longest blackout in American history, months without electricity, hospitals running on failing generators, patients dying in facilities with no power to run their equipment. And the federal response provided the final measurement of exactly how much Puerto Rican citizenship was worth. 9 days after Hurricane Harvey struck Texas, FEMA had approved $141 million in individual assistance. 9 days after Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico, FEMA had approved $6 million. Same agency, same country, same 9 days. 141 million versus 6 million. Those numbers do not require interpretation. They are the interpretation. Reconstruction money appropriated by Congress sat unspent in federal accounts for years. When funds moved, they moved with conditions that a government operating under Fiscal Control Board constraints was structurally unable to meet at the speed required. The rebuilding of Puerto Rico after Maria was not just slow. It was designed in a way that made speed structurally impossible. And the people who paid the price were the same people who had been paying for every other design decision for over a century. The legal framework that makes all of this possible has never been overturned. The insular cases decided in 1901 remain active precedent. In 2022, the Supreme Court ruled in United States versus Viela Madero that Congress retains the authority to exclude Puerto Rico from federal benefit programs available to the 50 states. The colonial legal architecture built in 1901, reinforced in 1920, weaponized in 1984, and institutionalized in 2016, is still standing, still functional, still deciding outcomes every single day. Puerto Rico has been an American territory for 127 years. In that time, the Jones Act has never been repealed. The bankruptcy exclusion has never been removed. The Fiscal Control Board has never been elected, and Congress has never passed a binding statehood bill, despite multiple referendums showing majority support on the island. Each of these facts has an explanation. Each explanation has a beneficiary. The shipping industry benefits from the Jones Act. The investors benefit from the debt structure. The creditors benefit from the Control Board. And Washington benefits from a territory that provides strategic military position and a captive market without the political cost of full representation. This is not a system that failed. This is a system that worked exactly as designed. The cage was not built all at once. It was assembled piece by piece over decades, each piece with its own justification, each piece serving its own constituency, and together producing an outcome that was never officially the stated goal, but was always the structural result. An American territory that could not compete, could not restructure, could not vote its way to equality, and could not leave. The system is still running. The Jones Act is still law. The Control Board still controls the budget. The insular cases are still precedent. And the $6 million versus $141 million is still the most honest number ever produced about what Puerto Rican citizenship is actually worth in Washington. Not what it says on the passport, what it is worth when the storm hits and the lights go out and the generators start to fail. That number has not changed because the system that produced it has not changed. It is still working, exactly as it was designed to.